Okay, I want to welcome everyone. I see we have potentially some new members in the list, so I want to welcome you all. We normally start with a very short introduction to the group, and then our main presenter will take over. So this is the group. That's our YouTube channel at the bottom. Every meeting will be recorded, of course, and posted. We're all about Azure. I could simplify this slide to just say we're all about Azure, everything about Azure. Everything from development to infrastructure to to management. Okay, we were founded back in 2013 with 4 members, and today we have almost 2,500 members now. But tell people about us because we want the group to have as many. It's sort of like a social network where you want to have as many connections as possible or as many viewers as possible. Especially since the group is now a global group. We have a lot of people outside of the Nashville area that are members of the group. I'm sure a lot of those folks are with us tonight. So spread the word. We are currently always meeting online. So that kind of matches with the global group business, since a lot of those people that are members are not in the Nashville area. So they're in other parts of Tennessee and other parts of the country. Let us know what topics you're interested in us covering, and let us know if there's an Azure-related topics that you want to present. We have a lot of members who have a lot of skills. I'm sure some of you folks out there might be interested in doing a presentation. This is the board of directors. I'm the group founder and president. I always tell people I'm the group's benevolent dictator, so that's my designation. I'm an Azure Solutions Architect. Roger Dahlman is the co-founder and vice president. He helped me found the group, and he's an enterprise architect at Deloitte here in Nashville. Tim, you've met by now because we've been talking to him. He's a prolific Pluralsight and course book author, and that's his URL, ticktrainertim.com. And Jack Hagler has been from Vaco, has been our refreshment sponsor when we met in person, and is still sponsoring the group in a way that I'll mention shortly. Okay, so Microsoft is a sponsor. They provide our meetup dues. So we've got a nice meetup subscription, so I don't have to pay for that out of my own pocket. And also, Vaco is also a sponsor, and they provide with a Zoom subscription. Okay. All right. So anyway, just a brief piece of information. We occasionally do have companies that want to make a little pitch for their product or service in the beginning of a meeting. If your company is interested in doing something like that, just drop Roger Dahlman a note. Again, he's in the group member list. All right. This is our YouTube channel, of course. You know where that is. And this is tonight's meeting. And tonight's meeting is on GitHub Actions. My tongue is all tangled up. GitHub Actions and Certification Quick Start with Tim, whom you've already met. Tim's an IT pro and principal author at Pluralsight. He's a former Microsoft senior content delivery developer and for Microsoft Learn, and a text trainer specializing in cloud computing and generative AI. And that's his URL as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
All right, Bill, thanks a lot. Hang on, everybody. Let me share my screen. All right, let's see here. Basic screen 2. Yeah, I can see that the UI has changed quite a bit here. I hate when they do that. So I'm kind of screen. Okay, I think I got it now. Share. All right. And Bill, if you would take care of the nonsense going on in the participant list. If not, I can handle it, but I've got to get back into the main view. It's annoying when that kind of stuff happens. Hang on, everybody. Let me get back to the controls here. Bill, if there'd be a way to put a waiting room, hang on a second, everybody. Let me enable the waiting room. And let me see. It's been a while. Haven't done modding for a while in Zoom. Let's see. Hang on, everybody. Okay. All right. All right. Well, anyway, thanks a lot for joining, everybody. I'll tell you one thing for sure. I'm here to talk to you for about an hour and answer any questions that you have about GitHub Actions, GitHub Advanced Security, and certification thereof. I want to spend just a moment discussing why I believe not just GitHub certification, but all IT certifications are potentially valuable in your career as an IT professional. By the end of the session, you'll have a good ground level understanding of the GitHub certs, what's in the portfolio, what they mean, how they work. I'm going to discuss two in particular because they're the ones that I have the most experience with: GitHub Actions and GitHub Advanced Security, or GHAS for short. The session materials are at timw.info, GH 2024. And let me bring out the chat. I'm going to put it in the chat as well. Session materials, timw.info/GH 2024. There we go. And that'll take you to a GitHub repo where I've staged not only the slide deck, but also some bunch of sample workflows and a links list. You'll see in just a second, because I intentionally wanted to minimize slides so we can spend most of our time doing stuff and working hands-on. First of all, I've been an IT pro for about 25 years or so, and I've been in the certification game the whole distance. Why I think IT certification matters, is worth your time and money and your effort, is as follows. One, it may not be optional. You may be required to hold certain certifications to qualify to bid for government work of various types and stripes. You may be looking for a job and the potential employer, say, is a Microsoft partner, and they have to have certified staff. So certification may be a condition of your employment, and it's actually something to say as a leg up as a candidate if you already have the cert that they're talking about in the job, you know. As far as goals, bolstering your performance review, a cert is a good tangible thing to bring up at your yearly performance or however often you do your performance reviews. It demonstrates, I should say, a commitment to continuing education in IT. Another goal, enhancing your source credibility, particularly with your clients if you're a client-facing consultant. Another goal, differentiate yourself in a job market, as I said before. And lastly, future-proof your career as much as you can. It's just another layer. Just like information security, talk about defense in depth and adding layers of security controls. I think I approach my career the same way. Layers of redundancy, layers of good stuff. Now, what are these certifications from GitHub? They are, I believe, 4 of them: GitHub Actions, GitHub Advanced Security, GitHub Admin, and GitHub Foundations. Now, I first learned of these certs a few years ago. They're not new. At least, let's see, at the very least, GitHub Administration and Actions are pretty old. It used to be originally that they were only for GitHub partner organizations. It was just an extra feather in your cap, I guess, that you could have. And I believe they were even free to take back then. Gradually, they've become public. And GitHub, when were they announced? I think it might have been at the Ignite conference or whenever it was, in the last 6 months. They haven't been around all that long. And they form, I think, the bulk, the 80% scenario of what GitHub is all about. I mean, the foundations would be making sure that you know all the vocabulary, the GitHub flow, the major GitHub products and services. GitHub admin, I would imagine, I don't have any real experience with that skills. I have the skills, but not with the certification. But I'm guessing it's going to be about configuring managed identities and all that kind of stuff. Bill, I'm going to say one more time, if you could not let more people in via the lobby, because it seems like we've still got this stuff going on. So let me go back to the participants list here.
I will comply.
Yeah, this isn't working for me. Not at all.
Who is that?
And I don't think it's working for anybody.
Okay.
Let's see here. Okay.
I don't see.
Try one more time. Just the facts regarding the exams. How intensive might these be as far as your ramp up and then clearing the exam? How much is it going to cost you? How much time do you have to invest in the exam itself? Well, let me answer this, giving you publicly available information about these GitHub exams. They're $99 USD. which is equivalent to what Microsoft charges for their foundations level certifications like Azure Fundamentals and Azure Security Fundamentals. Here's an issue. If you sign in primarily with a managed enterprise GitHub account, those currently don't work for whatever reason with the GitHub exam engine. So GitHub says you need to use a personal account for certification if you are an EMU, as they're called. GitHub partners, interestingly, not with Pearson VUE, but with PSI, who does some other cert vendors. They don't have, in my opinion, as great of a reputation as Pearson VUE, but GitHub operates independently from Microsoft. Even though Microsoft owns GitHub, GitHub really marches to the beat of their own drummer in many ways. The exams have a time limit of 120 minutes or 2 hours, and they consist of 60. So you get full 2 minutes per item, multiple choice items. My impression thus far is that the exams are not, like huge experiences. Like, for example, the Azure Administrator Certification exam, that is a beast. No question about it. I don't care how much Azure experience you have, it's going to challenge you. These seem to be much more aligned to the 900 level. If you're familiar with how Microsoft does their certs, the certs are valid for 3 years, which is 2 years more than Microsoft. Time to do a demo. Let's take a look at these technologies. Specifically, I wanted to tour GitHub Actions and GitHub Advanced Security. The reason why I have a much deeper relationship, I guess, with those certifications is because I just completed recently 2 Microsoft Press video training courses. One, I think, is published, the GitHub Actions one. You can get it at LinkedIn or O'Reilly Live Learning, whatever, Safari Books Online, whatever it's called. And I'm not a salesman. I'm saying this strictly because it's relevant, really. The second course that I just submitted that's not pubbed yet, that's on GitHub Advanced Security. But I call those out because we're so new in GitHub certification. There's not a lot of prep material out there. My video course is among just few. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, I haven't found any practice tests yet. They'll probably show up first on Udemy. So we're looking at my repo that I created for us tonight. The full URL is github.com, Timothy Warner, GH 2024. And what it is, like I said, is a copy of the PowerPoint. And then the README is actually pretty useful. The README has contact info if you want to get together or connect, whatever the term is. Let's see, general info regarding the certs, and then in particular, the docs to GitHub Actions and GitHub Advanced Security. And then I've given you pretty much all that's extant now regarding those certifications. It's really early days. GitHub appears over the years to haven't really prioritized those certs. A lot of folks, when I was at Microsoft, for instance, didn't know that they were always available for us. It's that notion of you live in Manhattan, but you haven't visited the Statue of Liberty. That I think that might be partially at play. So that's really it as far as the cert goes. I made a case why I think they're worth your time, in my opinion. I'm pursuing all 4 of them myself. It's worth it for me financially. And you know what I'll say? Having been so deep in 2 of those 4 certifications, coming out of that process, I'm a lot more comfortable and fluent in GitHub than I was before. Now, of course, you think, Tim, that's a Captain Obvious point. Of course, you're going to be more comfortable with GitHub. Yeah, in fact, that's kind of the point. I loved getting into this material, partially because it helped me finally gain clarity of this behemoth that's GitHub. You've got the enterprise at the top, then you've got your organizations, and then underneath your organizations, you have your individual repos. And then you're thinking with GitHub Actions, automating all of the things. How can I do things like create reusable workflows that I can consume from X number of repos in my organization? Or with GitHub Advanced Security, how can I make sure that we're watching our open source dependencies such that if there's any vulnerabilities identified, Dependabot, the service in GitHub that does this, can not only detect out-of-date dependencies, but you can configure the service to actually open pull requests to bump versions. So you wind up coming out of this cert study with a lot more clarity. Oh, cool. I feel a lot more confident and competent in GitHub. And then to add the cherry on top of that, you've got a portable credential that you can take with you. It actually, even though your current employer may sponsor the certification, you're not going to surrender those certs when you move to your next position. They're portable, So I can't think of a single reason off the top to diss them. I know that certs are pretty still, after all these years, can be controversial in terms of how much you think they're worth. Anyhow, I don't see anything in the chat more about certs, so I think I'll spend the rest of the time up to dedicated Q&A, getting a little technical in here with you. So if you don't know much or anything about GitHub Actions, what does it actually do? Well, we're looking here at a simple, it's not exactly a code base, but it's what we're going to use in this demo. And in here, I've got a hidden folder called .github. And in the .github hidden folder, I've got a subfolder called workflows. That's really important, actually. The way you do any kind of automation in your GitHub repositories is by creating a YAML format file in that specific path. You have to have .github, you have to have workflows, plural, and then you've got your YAML or YML YAML files that represent the actual workflows. As you can see in your repository across the top global navigation, we've got actions. That's where you can see any workflows that are stored in that .github workflows location. And we can also review a workflow at a time, what their past run history is, both success and failures. And we can always come in and audit and report and track. For example, this run 5 hours ago failed 16 seconds into its execution. What's the problem? If I zoom out a little bit, whoops, let me go back up to summary. We can see I've got some warnings, things that didn't break my build, but I might want to take a look at. A lot of times, if you've got references to outdated actions, I'll talk more about what an action is specifically in just a second. But what actually broke this build, we can take a look and see step by step what our cloud runner, in other words, our GitHub hosted virtual machine that's responsible for doing our automation, what it does from step. And we can instantly see, in this case, it failed during the check. What this workflow does, by the way, we can take a look at it in detail. It's just kind of a Mickey Mouse example. I wanted something that was relevant, but relevant to this repo. And this repo is just basically a docs library, isn't it? So what I'm doing in this particular example, let me put it in the editor, which is a little bit easier to work with. And let me zoom in to make it look hopefully semi-okay. Anyway, what you've got in the format of the YAML, besides a name, which is the overall display name of the workflow, you define what is the event or what are the events that will trigger that automation. Now, we could have another whole separate conversation of what you want to automate. What this is going to do, let me let the cat out of the bag. What this is going to do, like the file name implies, is look at my README file and test every URL in that links list and make sure that they're all working, that I don't get any 404s or any stray errors. So that's my automation. But you may be more interested if you're doing continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD processes. You may need to build your software. If it's like a C# or a Java project, for example, maybe you want to run smoke tests. You've got a battery. The idea here is that you've got a battery of various test routines and safety checks and compliance checks. And really, a workflow is nothing more than a stitched together sequence of scripts. So as I say, you define the event or events that trigger the workflow. That's using the on keyword. And the most common ones I've found are push, pull request, and workflow dispatch. But of course, in the docs, there's a lot more. This is saying that this workflow will trip whenever there's a commit that happens on the main branch. In other words, when I push a feature branch and create a pull request, that's actually another specific thing. The pull request one allows anytime a pull request is opened or edited, it'll rerun the workflow. So you'll wind up over time, depending upon your sprawl, what you're responsible for repo-wise, you could wind up with quite a few workflows going around. I prefer the simplest possible approach myself. Workflow dispatch, by the way, is a way to just do an on-off trigger. It's a way for you to manually invoke the workflow rather than rely upon an automated event. Your workflows consist of jobs that are run on runner machines, and those runners can either be hosted in GitHub, and they run, the runners you can choose from are either Ubuntu, Linux, Windows Server, or even Mac OS. You can install an agent to do self-hosted runners, just like if you're familiar with other build platforms like Azure DevOps, for example. So in this case, we're saying we're going to use a GitHub hosted Ubuntu machine. And what it will do in that job is run a series of steps. These series of steps are where you're linking into the actions library. You can look at a GitHub action as basically a package script. That's all it is. There's the owner / action name, and then there's the version. And you can pin, as you can see, your action to a specific version. So if the dev updates the version to v3 and it breaks your workflow, just stay on v2, easy as pie. In this example, we're looking at the checkout is always going to be there. That instructs the runner to download and unpack your all of your assets, all of your, what do they call it in GitHub? I don't think they call it artifacts, but it's that idea, your workspace, basically. Bring and make sure that you've checked out the code and you're on the proper branch. And then from there, I'm invoking somebody named Peter Evans, a third-party action. And then you've got the properties of the action. How do you learn about actions, what they do? What I normally do if I am looking at somebody else's code is I'll just run a Google or Bing search for that action. And you'll find that thanks to Google and high search engine optimization, you can find out exactly where that action comes from. And you'll find that these actions, this one looks like it's been archived. It looks like I've got some updating to consider. You see what I mean? The fact that these actions are all open source can be very helpful for us. In fact, that's one of the exam objectives. What are the things that you should look for when you're building a workflow? Let me bring out the little side panel here because this allows you to search the GitHub marketplace, just about anything you can imagine. Let's say you were doing an Azure deployment and you needed to interact with Key Vault to fetch a password or something. I wonder if there's a Key Vault action in here. Well, there's a lot of them, you see. So rule 1, are you interacting with a verified publisher or not? And if not, be careful. Look, with a especially serious eye at third parties, because, reputation, that sort of thing. I would want to look and see if I could filter to look at only verified publishers. I'd want to go to the marketplace specifically. So I would want to go to, say, github.com/marketplace, and we can go searching for actions here. And you can see that when you're a publisher and you make an action, and you make actions either with JavaScript or with Docker containers if you're not going to use JavaScript. GitHub is JavaScript, really. And when you publish your action, it's going to be in a public repo, and then you can apply to become part of the marketplace, and you can apply to be a verified creator. That's going to give you more reputation. You see what I'm saying? Ultimately, these actions are all just, you invoke them with YAML. You just look at the description of the action, read up on its syntax, its attributes, blah, blah, blah. There'll oftentimes be examples. And then you're just copying and pasting. I mean, in my development environment in VS Code, what do I have installed here as far as extensions go? Let's see. GitHub publishes a whole bunch of really great first-party extensions. What do I have installed on this in this particular machine? GitHub Copilot, right? GitHub Actions. This is going to give you support for workflow syntax and auto completion and all of that kind of stuff. So you'll absolutely want to have the GitHub Actions official extension installed. I would recommend GitHub Copilot and Copilot Chat just on general principle. GitHub pull requests and issues is good. Frankly, I like the GitHub color theme because it accommodates me. I feel seen because it offers colorblind formats, as you can see. And as a colorblind human being, I really appreciate that extra, differentiation, whatever you want to call it. So I've just cloned that repo, the course repo, down to my machine here. I figured I'd show you some more complicated sample workflows. Many of these sample workflows are touching on GitHub Advanced Security, which we'll take a look at in demo back in the browser in just a second. I'd mentioned that in GitHub Advanced Security, which is actually an add-on, you might wonder, is GitHub Actions free? The way GitHub Actions works with pricing is that if it's a public repo, it's free and you get basic functionality. You can do actions and you get a quota of compute minutes per month. And in your GitHub user account properties in your settings, you can see how much you've burned over that month. Beyond that, beyond the free tier for private and internal repositories, again, there's a free quota and then you pay for your runtime minutes beyond that. Okay. Now you can have GitHub Actions going with just a personal GitHub account. It would be best from a governance standpoint to at least have organizations so that you can make shareable repos. That's a common pattern with workflow. You can create a .github repo at your organization level. I'll quickly show you, at least get you started with it. So in our hierarchy here, Timothy Warner, that's my personal account. But if I go up to my org, because I've created an org called, imaginatively enough, Timothy Warner org. And in here in the settings in particular is where you can tweak up, for example, how GitHub Actions is going to behave for all of your repos, for example. You can customize runners, retention, approvals, all that stuff. That's under the org, it's under actions, and you can configure runners and runner groups, and caching is another big deal because the runners are going to have to download dependencies every time they run the workflow, and you might have the workflow popping off many times per day. Wouldn't it make sense for the runner to bring those dependencies and assets down, and then you cache them in GitHub in their content delivery network? So that way, subsequent workflow runs, your runners have immediate access to the dependencies. So it gives you a much faster, more performant environment. These are things we can govern from the org level. Farther down the list somewhere, it's always fun, pun intended, looking through all these settings. Under security, this stuff here where it gets into code security and analysis particularly, this is the GitHub Advanced Security feature set. In fact, right in one of these, here it is, GitHub Advanced Security. GHAS, as it's called, is an add-on. It's a per user per month. It's actually per active committer. And you pay for GHAS per developer, no matter what, for your private and internal repos. Remember how I said that GitHub Actions, as long as your repo is public, GitHub as a salute to open source development gives you those free minutes and gives you extra features. You get basic GitHub Advanced Security features like Dependabot alerts for free. But if you're doing private and internal repos, you're going to have to pay. It's per active committer. So anyway, where does the GitHub Advanced Security stuff show up once you start using it? Well, let's take a look at my repo list and see if I have anything interesting. A lot of fun, and here's something that you can try yourself, is to clone the PyGoat repo, the OWASP, which is that group that publishes the top 10 web app vulnerabilities every year. They have a couple test apps that are really great. PyGoat is Python, and then there's a JavaScript, TypeScript one. I forgot what that's called, but I've got them all in my org, so you can actually prowl. I give you full permission to prowl through all of my public repos. Hopefully that's all you can get to. It shouldn't laugh, really. But PyGoat is here as well as the other one. I just did a straight up fork and clone. They're really nice projects because they're intentionally loaded with vulnerabilities. So as you can see, security up here has 1,608 issues going on. Wow, or alerts, technically. And so Dependabot is all about your open source dependencies, your libraries and packages from NPM and PyPy and NuGet and so forth. You have any that are out of date? And if so, Dependabot's going to give you a rich and robust report. It's going to tell you everything you need to know. But what I want you to know, and I know this for a fact, is that the engineers at GitHub who make this made these reports in a way where you don't necessarily have to be a full-time InfoSec researcher to understand them. If you are a full-time person, you can get all into CVSS and CWEs and CVEs all day long. But if you're not, you can at least see just very quickly and briefly, vulnerable call. Here's the line of code, and it gives a little description of why, tells us some more details, and oftentimes, depending upon if it's just bumping the version, it can open up a pull request automatically, as you can see right here, that you can put those PRs through your review process that come from automation. In this case, GHAS, just the same way that, you know, a human developer would do the same thing. Let me go back to the security overview blade. Security overview blade also has code scanning. There's really three main pillars of GitHub Advanced Security. There's the Dependabot for dependency tracking. There's code scanning, which actually looks at your code base and analyzes your source code according to see if there's anything that's suspicious, that's potentially vulnerable. It's not looking at your code and giving you linting. It's not looking at your code and giving you suggestions for improvement for performance, let's say. No, it's purely what are you doing? You might want to sanitize this input over here. You might want to not use that. You see what I'm saying? It all deals with that kind of stuff. And as you can see, I've got a whole bunch of critical alerts in that PyGoat project where we can just see, again, what's going on. So here it's not going to open up PRs, but instead, in keeping with the DevOps principle of short feedback loops, the idea is for your devs to get notified of this as soon as possible so they can fix it and then send in a PR and just put it through the pipeline again and again and again until it passes, you see? Anything else on that secure? Yeah, secret scanning, right. That's the third member of the GHAS or GitHub Advanced Security family. Secret scanning is purely involved in, do you have a leaked API key in your source code? Do you have what looks to be an OpenAI format key or an Azure format key or that? GitHub has a threat intelligence library where it knows pretty much all the world's API key formats. Like OpenAI keys start with SK-, for example. So secret scanning is doing basically regular expression matching. I know that it's got AI and other sprinkling dust, fairy dust or whatever in there, but largely it's about looking for regex patterns that match known values. Another thing would be passwords that are in known credential dumps. So as you can tell, secret scanning is pretty important. You know what I like the most about secret scanning? When you configure secret scanning, you can configure it. I don't know if I can remember where the setting is. I can quickly try. Hang on just a second. Code security and analysis, secret scanning. Yeah, push protection. This is really cool. Push protection makes sure that when your dev sitting at their desk goes to publish their feature branch to GitHub to get ready to open a PR, that won't happen if there's an exposed secret in their change set. In other words, secret scanning is going to protect the code before it's even committed in GitHub to the target branch. Isn't that awesome? The way that GitHub recognizes these various key formats and token formats, they've got a list of what they call partners, and all the biggies are there, as you would expect. And this just allows the secret scanning service to send a secret that it sees in your code. It's basically a consent that it's okay to send that to the partner, and the partner will come back. They've got automation. Like, for example, let's say I go to push my branch and I've accidentally leaked an OpenAI API key. What'll happen behind the scenes is secret scan will see that. And if it's not able to make a judgment immediately, which in this case we know it would probably, but in a worst case scenario, it would live send that key to OpenAI, and OpenAI would respond in automation that this is a known valid key and it is a legit alert and it is a legit leak. And it can also tell, I found, if the key's already been invalidated, it'll say, I found this key. It's invalidated, but just to let you know. So it's super useful for that kind of stuff. All right. And these exams are all relatively low level. They're, from what I've seen and experienced and heard, they're, believe it or not, considered kind of fun to take. I mean, I had fun making the Microsoft Press courses, to be honest with you, because this is a lot of fun to play with. Maybe it's just my own personality, but anyway. Let's see, sweeping up the shavings here. Is there anything? Okay, let me check out the meeting chat, everybody, because I think it is moving along a little bit. Let me start with the most recent. Gilma, does GitHub ever have sales or discounts on their certifications? And are their certification exams online based? Gilma, the answer to your first question is no, there's not discounts yet. And I think that's for two reasons. One, it's early days. They were just announced generally available not too long ago. So I think GitHub wants to get some initial ROI or return on investment before they think of a discount. And number two, I'm quite sure that GitHub bottomed out the price as much as it could, 99 USD or your currency equivalent. I don't see them getting lower than that, honestly. All right. Are the exams online? Yes, they are actually. Now, in contrast to, say, Microsoft exams, where you can report to a physical Pearson VUE testing center, I don't believe PSI actually has any brick and mortar partners. So that means you'd be taking the exam online. If you look at the README in our course files or in the session files, again, the short URL was timw.info/GH2024 for GitHub 2024. In the README list, I have some links to all 4 docs under general info. If you click around in those links, you can tell, well, I can tell, you may not be able to tell, maybe you could, but it's pretty obvious that GitHub is putting in what seems like minimal effort, because you'll find that their cert pages are, well, whatever. I'll leave you to draw your own opinion. But what you'll find there, among other things, are links to verify that your system works well with the PSI system. Trying to think if I've ever used PSI. I believe I have for an Okta certification, and it was fine. You know, my best practice suggestion for taking an online certification is to do it not on your desktop computer, but on a laptop computer. Why? So that you can easily move it to another room. I had a horrible situation once where I was on a laptop, but I was in kind of an involved area where it was difficult to move. And that particular proctor must have woke up on the wrong side of the bed that day and was really grumpy about my environment. And I wound up going to the bathroom at my home, spare bathroom, figuring what kind of distractions are going to be in here. So for the next few months, I was actually taking all my certs in the bathroom until, and I kid you not, I got another proctor who must have woken up on the wrong side of the bed, who was convinced it was disallowed to take the exam in the washroom. So I was like, okay. So I got out of the bathroom and went to the guest bedroom. Anyway, long answer to your question. Let's see. Dr. Wilkins, how does GitHub tell if it's a secret? Can we configure our own secret extension? All right, good question. Yeah. Let me see. To answer this question, let me go up to the org level so I'll have more controls over secret scanning. And let's go into our org settings. I think I was just there. Yeah, I was. If I go down under security, code security and analysis, I'm going to have to just briefly check my short-term storage here. Yeah, here you go. You can create patterns. There's the answer to your question, I think. So in your org, and you can create orgs for free. I didn't actually know that, full confession here. I didn't know that until I started researching for my Microsoft Press course on GitHub Actions Cert. You can create orgs as a personal free user. Well, maybe you have to have GitHub Pro. But orgs are a good idea because you now have a layer above your repos that you can organize for governance purposes. But I think these patterns here are what we're talking about. And an example of what one of these patterns looks like, it's basically, is it regex? Yeah. You're going to just use regular expressions. And as you can see in this UI, you specify your format. And you can even do some testing right here in the browser, which is pretty convenient, definitely. Let's see. Wilson says, one action I added is to generate README files into several languages. Wow, that's cool. Let me copy that link and throw that up here. Thanks for sharing that, Wilson. And this, again, is another good heads up about open source collaboration. As I said, you might find some useful stuff for another certification, let's say, that you're working on by lurking at, I would go to just Timothy Warner because most of my stuff are there and not up in the org level. All right. But yeah, ultimately, when it comes to automating all of the things, I used to find that expression a little cringy, but now it's really the truth. It's not simply software development lifecycle where you're doing CI/CD, although that's probably the 80% scenario. We're talking about anything. I would challenge you to think about any activity in your repo that you do maybe 2 or 3 times. That's a good rule of thumb in terms of thinking about automating it. And there the question is, what are my trigger or triggers? Shouldn't be too difficult to figure that out. Do I have a specialized enough automation to where I have to have my own runners where I can install my own stuff? Or can I get by with cloud runners? You can actually do quite a bit with GitHub hosted runners. So if you need them to download something themselves, you can have them do that. So don't think that you're going to be forced to shell out for your own self-hosted runners necessarily. So it's a question of choosing your runner, and then it's going to be looking for actions. What's going to fit your use case? And you know what my dirty little secret is there? I was laughing with one of my colleagues at Pluralsight about that today. I said, how many people are walking around with ChatGPT as their dirty little secret at work in particular? A lot, but really not a lot, because wouldn't you say that the majority of humans nowadays are either ignorant of generative AI or afraid of it and haven't yet crossed over? That may be you, and I honestly don't mean any shade or criticism in that, although I would enthusiastically encourage you to embrace Gen AI, if for no other reason, for self-preservation of your IT career. Because what I'm saying here, for example, is that I can open up the GitHub Copilot chat pane here at any point in time. And let me just say I'm working on a new workflow. I'll put it in, let's see, I'll put it in the appropriate location. And I'll just call this demo.yaml. I can always change the name. And I'm going to use prompting techniques. And along with a feature of GitHub Copilot in VS Code called the workspace context, check this out. I won't belabor this too long, but I think it's worth your while. A common complaint historically with using GitHub Copilot to help you write and improve your code is that for the longest time, actually, the visibility workspace of GitHub Workspace, the visibility works, Bill, I'm inheriting the tongue-tied thing from you. The historical context of GitHub Copilot was your open tabs here. So if you wanted GitHub Copilot to reference more than just your currently active code file, you had to keep them up here, but that's no longer the case. You can address what's called the workspace context. Make sure that you're saving your environment as a workspace, and then you can, in GitHub Copilot chat, do @workspace. And then I could say, I'm going to actually be real world here. I mean, because we know this is just kind of a Mickey Mouse repo. We've got one that automates link checking, which is legitimately useful. I wonder if there's anything else that we might automate in this repo, even given how spare it is. Why don't I ask my assistant? Think of a second useful workflow specific to this repo that showcases GitHub Actions in a real world context. I guess that's good for now. What are we doing with a good prompt? Being as concise and yet as verbose as possible. Talk about a juxtaposition or what's that term, like oxymoron, I think the term is. Yeah, because we want to be compact, especially if you're paying for your tokens, but we also need to be verbose enough so the AI has a minimal set of assumptions to make. So what's this saying here? Because I addressed it or pointed GitHub Copilot to my context, the first thing it does is it evaluates what's actually in your workspace, in that case, my whole directory tree. And then given that, it's now giving me another workflow. What is it recommending? A useful workflow could be one that validates these YAML files to ensure that they're correctly formatted. You see what I mean? So what's this one do? Just, very garden variety triggers, just a single job. I mean, again, this is really basic. Of course, you can get more robust. I mean, when you're referencing these actions here, you can actually create your own actions. Let's say you had an automation that was so specialized, you did need to roll your own. So you'd go ahead and do that, but you're not willing or able to publish it to the GitHub marketplace because it's proprietary. No problem. You can build your project in a repo that's private, internal, and you can reference that from other workflows in your organization. Just basically on the uses line here on 21, you're just going to path out, use relative or is it absolute pathing? You use some kind of pathing syntax that I can't remember right now that points to the repo and the location and the version of your custom action. So long story short, there's a lot of room for creativity here. There's a lot of room for flexibility here. And it's really, I think, pretty dadgum exciting. Let's see, any other questions I haven't answered? Yeah, as far as the future, what's happening in GitHub in particular, and I'm wondering how much this affects workflows, is you might have heard of GitHub Next. If you point your browser to githubnext.com, that's basically a part of the GitHub blog that shows you from napkin sketch all the way up to beta and beyond various projects that different teams at GitHub are doing. Not all of them deal with generative AI, but as you would perhaps expect, many of them do. Another site to stay current would be GitHub Copilot X, which refers to the next generation features for GitHub Copilot specifically. Now, this notion of Copilot is pretty difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's pretty difficult to be clear for various reasons. GitHub Copilot versus Microsoft Copilot versus Copilot in Windows versus, yeah, you can tell we're early days with this. And then when you combine Microsoft and their love of rebranding, we've got I guess we're kind of forced to be patient and roll with things as they continue to change and evolve. One thing that I've observed that I'm happy with personally is, remember a couple months ago when Sam Altman was ousted from the board at OpenAI, and there was a huge upset at their board. And then Satya Nadella came in and said, no, we're going to do it this way. I've noticed, and I'd be interested to know if you agree, that OpenAI has been a bit less happy about breaking everybody's code in terms of doing very fast, what I perceive as borderline reckless changes. I think Satya might have put a nice throttle on that, which is good to know. But the bottom line is, with this generative AI thing being such a gold rush situation, and with Microsoft putting it into every nook and cranny of their product portfolio, like I said, I think it's on the table no matter what you're doing in IT. I mean, I'm a technical trainer. I'm using generative AI pretty regularly now for researching, for validation. Is it actually making courseware for me? No, but I will use it as an assistant to take a course or to take a lesson maybe that I've made and throw it up to a custom trained GPT and say, what do you think? Given that you're a fount of all instructional design knowledge, because I trained it that way, what do you think of this lesson and how could I make it more impactful for students? What am I leaving out? All right. Other than that, what else you got for me here? We're approaching the top of the hour. What questions, comments, concerns, curiosities, complaints, or anything else do you have? Bill, would you come off mic and let me know what you think? Or come on, Mike, I guess.
Sure, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you're open for questions. If there are no more questions, we'll wrap it up until next month.
Mm-hmm.
What do you folks think? Questions? Comments?
Was it that complete of a lesson? Silence, you always can take a number of different ways. This summary slide, let me just quickly get this out of the ways. I would say a top line takeaway here is early days with GitHub certifications. We will see practice tests before too long from the major providers. And then, as I said earlier, I believe that if nothing else, studying for and clearing these exams, earning these certs, it might give you a good excuse to dig into the products and services and be better at using them, which is a great thing, as well as I said, giving you a portable DevOps credential to take with you elsewhere in your career. There's the session materials, timw.info, GH 2024. My Pluralsight library, timw.info/PS. And my preferred contact method at this point is LinkedIn, timw.info/LI. Wilson, video session, I do teach live sessions for O'Reilly. Again, it sounds like an ad, everybody, but I swear it's relevant. But yeah, if you go to O'Reilly's live learning site, I think it's live.o'reilly.com. I'm going to be teaching on the GitHub Actions and the GitHub Advanced Security certs coming up pretty regularly. They couldn't get it on the calendar for, I think, another month or two. So it's going to be a little while, but oh yeah. Yeah, I'm not going away with the subject matter. When I find a subject matter really engaging and fascinating, it combines with my autism in a way where I'm pretty much an unstoppable force. I'm going to learn all the things with this and I'm going to pass it on to others. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, well, thanks. This is another phenomenal presentation, just as your presentations usually are. I'd like to put a plug for Tim's courses on O'Reilly, because I subscribe to O'Reilly, and I've been through several of his courses. So with that, I'll see you folks next month. Okay. Come on, where is it?